Hey everyone, Clio here, and today I'm coming at you with an original book tag. And that is, as you have already seen in the title probably, Pandora's Box book tag. So the idea behind this book tag is basically to recreate the myth of Pandora's box through books, and I got this idea from watching a video by Sarah from Voyage Through Worlds, because she was talking about recommendation based on Greek gods, and that just really brought me back to those early days when I was a child and when I really loved reading all about the gods, about mythology and stuff like that. And Pandora's box was one of my favorite myths because we had it on audio cassette, so I listened to it all over again. I will say, as we will notice when we get through this myth, it is very much a misogynistic myth, because it's clearly indicating that the origin of all bad things happening on Earth is women. So I'll try to look for a more family-friendly myth, I guess, next time. I mean, it's not really family-friendly, but you know what I mean. The myth of Pandora's box is basically the consequence of another myth in Greek mythology, and that is the myth of Prometheus stealing the fire from the gods in order to give it over to mankind. So for this first prompt, I want you to recommend a book which has a heist plot to it, or which features a thief or somebody stealing something. And for this one, I'm going to be recommending Edge Dancer by Brandon Sanderson. Edge Dancer is, technically speaking, 2.5 in the Stormlight Archive. It is also a novella that could be read separately. However, I will warn you that there are slight spoilers for Stormlight Archive in there, as in there's an event that takes place right before this book that is hinted at throughout this book, and that is features in this book. But I don't think, if you haven't read Stormlight Archive, that you would pick up on that while later on reading the first two books in Stormlight Archive. But if you want to be safe, I would definitely say just dive into Stormlight Archive in the natural order of things. But so Edge Dancer is a short story in which we are following Lift. So Lift is a young girl, but she is a girl who, in her opinion, can become awesome. So her awesomeness is a sort of superpower in which she can make things grow and she can become super slick. And she uses up those powers to break into places in order to steal people's food, because she loves food and she loves stealing rich people's food. So after Ptolemy stole fire and gave it to mankind, the gods were extremely angry, and most particularly Zeus, the god of gods. He felt betrayed by Ptolemy, and he wanted to enact revenge. So for prompt number 2, recommend a book that has a revenge plot to it. And for that one, I'm going to recommend An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the revenge part of this prompt, because that is actually something that features later on in the book, so it could be considered a spoiler. But An Orchestra of Minorities is a book about a simple chicken farmer called Chinonso, who is actually quite content with his life until he meets a girl who is about to commit suicide. He is able to talk her out of it, and they form a strong bond with one another. But as a result of this bond, he's also his life will be changing quite drastically, because her family really does not approve of him. Her family are on the richer side, on the more influential side. They very much look down upon him, and in order to try and prove himself worthy of her, he will make some very rash decisions. He will do things, and he will have very bleak things happening in his life. This is very much a difficult book to get through. It is very much a book in which you see your character make bad decisions, in which you see your character undergo some very big trauma, and it's not an easy read. It definitely reminded me of A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara a little bit, in the sense of the feelings I personally had while reading the book. But I definitely do think it is a great book. It's a book in which, at the end of the book, you won't recognize your protagonist anymore if you compare him to the protagonist that was there at the very beginning of the book. So Zeus wanted to enact his revenge, and as a result he had the first female created. So he had the first woman created, which is of course our well-known Pandora. So for this prompt, I want you to recommend a book that has something to do with creation. Now this can be the creative art, so it can be a book that has to do with music, that has to do with writing or something like that, or it can be something to do with literal creation of life, let's say. So either about birth, for example, but also about science, cloning and things like that. The book that I've chosen is The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto by Mitch Albom. This is a it's a historical novel in which we are looking at this fictional character of Frankie Presto, who is kind of born in bad circumstances in Spain, and he's very much orphaned at a very early age, but he has this natural talent for music, and this is what's going to ultimately guide him through life. He also has a magic string, he has a magic guitar that has 6 magic strings. Then if he each of these strings has the power to change a life. It is a very nice book that is very, it looks at musical history of the time, so it's talking about real life musicians and inserting the life of Frankie Presto into their lives. And I would recommend it to people who love Daisy Jones and the Six, because it also talks about a musical career, also looks at the darker sides of fame, at like the drug abuse and things like that, but also just at the sheer anxiety that a career like that can induce. I would also recommend it to people who like The Book Thief, because this one is narrated by music, so we also have that sort of supernatural element to the narration side. And it is also recommended to people who love the movie Forrest Gump, because it has very much of that same feeling to it as Forrest Gump had, and it's also very much seeing Frankie Presto end up in these weird situations and kind of seeing him influence a lot of famous people, and kind of without any sort of real explanation ending up in all of these people's lives. So Zeus gives the first woman the name Pandora. Now Pandora means all gifted, so she is given gifts by the gods. And so for this prompt I want you to recommend a book that you were gifted. So one of the books that I was recently gifted for Christmas is The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. This is a Japanese book about a cat. So the cat Nana, she is a street cat at the beginning of this book, but she kind of makes her way into a heart of a human, and when she's then hit by a car, he helps her to recover and she becomes his forever cat. However, at the beginning of this book, her owner, through circumstances, has to get rid of her, and so he goes and visits his old friends to try and find a new owner for her. This is a heartwarming but also a heartbreaking book in parts. So as you can imagine, we are looking at a beautiful relationship between human and cat, but as he's looking for a new owner, there are also some very heartbreaking parts to this book. This book is in part centered around this relationship between human and cat, but a very big part of this book is very much looking at human relationships and at the flawness of human communication at times. So they're very much relationships that have open wounds to them, that haven't been fully realized in the past. And so in these visits to his old friends, they will be diving back into their past experiences and healing some of these wounds. A very beautiful book that I definitely had to shed a tear over when I was reading it. So Pandora is then gifted to the brother of Ptolemaeus, and that I'm going to have to look up that name, Epimetheus. Now Epimetheus had been warned, his brother had told him not to accept any gift by Zeus, but Epimetheus fell in love with Pandora when he saw her, so he ignored the warning from his brother. So for this prompt I want you to recommend a book that in which a warning is ignored. For this one I'm going to recommend a book that I actually don't physically own, and that is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. We Need to Talk About Kevin is a very dark book. It's a book about a mother who after giving birth to her son, basically doesn't have any sort of connection to her son. Don't remember whether this was also the case during her pregnancy already or anything like that, but she very much considers her son, doesn't have these motherly affections for her son, and as years pass on, she actually starts to consider her son as being this sort of evil, let's call it like that. That's probably too strong of a word to refer to it, but she definitely starts seeing her son as doing things that young boys shouldn't do, as taking pleasure out of doing cruel acts. And so her husband doesn't see any of this. Her husband considers her to be a bad mother, to be thinking these things about her son. But as we will come to see throughout the book, there are bad things happening later on in the book, and so in a sense her feelings about her son might have been a warning. The other side of the story could also be, of course, because of her rejection of her son might have grown into a much more darker person than he could have been with her affection. So it's a very interesting book. If you've seen the movie, then I would still very much recommend the book, because I think it goes into these things a lot darker. I also don't remember how much you know at the beginning of this book. I know that in one of these two versions, either the movie or the book, you know the big event already at the beginning, but I'm not sure which one it is, so I'm not going to say anything about that. So Prometheus, the new husband of Pandora, actually has an item in his possession that he needs to guard, and that is the box that Pandora will be opening. But actually the box is not a box in the original versions of this myth. It was actually a jar. So for this prompt I want you to recommend a book that wasn't what you originally thought it was going to be. And so for that one I'm going to be recommending Lanny by Max Porter. This is my favorite book of 2019, and it was such a surprise for me, because this book, you cannot sell this book really. It's really impossible to sell this story, because it's basically a story about city folk who've moved into the countryside, and they have this son Lanny, and Lanny is a little bit of a boy who's very much still innocent, very much still naive. He's very much still he's very much still tuned into the natural world and the sort of more mysterious plane of the natural world. And the book is very much centered around Lanny, but I can almost not say anything more about this, because then I'm going to go into spoiler territory. But it's a beautiful book. It's told in a very interesting way, because it has an interesting structure as well. Let me see if I can get some examples. So I don't know if you see it very well, but there is some interesting script transcription being used, and I would actually recommend the audiobook for this one, maybe along with the physical book. I have never read it physically yet, so I might do that again at some point. But the audiobook is a full cast narration, and one of these characters is a sort of very mythical character, is Dead Papa Toothwick, and he's kind of the voice of the town, and he listens in on different people in the town saying things about the events taking place, and so you get a sort of cacophony of sounds within this town, and it's absolutely beautiful. I really thoroughly enjoyed this one, and hope for more people to find their way to it, though I have seen quite a few people pick this one up, luckily. So Pandora opens the box. So Pandora has been told never to open the box. She is not allowed to do so, but her curiosity overcomes her, and so she opens the box and lets all of this misery loose into the world. So the idea behind this prompt is to recommend a book in which a character unwittingly unleashes a lot of harm onto the world, and my recommendation for that is going to be Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. So Jurassic Park is a wonderful book. If you've seen the movie, you can definitely still read the book. There is not a whole lot extra to it, but it's definitely still enjoyable, and there's this sort of guiding principle to the book narration, in which we are looking at chaos theory, which is a small element to the movie, but this is very much the structural base for this book. And in my opinion, that kind of elevates the whole story a little bit. But so in Jurassic Park, in case you didn't know, we have a wealthy guy who decides that he wants to recreate the age of the dinosaurs by creating a theme park in which you can go and watch dinosaurs. So obviously nothing can go wrong there, right? So by opening the box, Pandora has set loose all sorts of bad things into the world. So she sets loose things such as famine, such as death, such as pandemics, and all of these things. And so when she realizes what is happening, she quickly tries to close the box, but only one thing remains inside the box, and that is hope. So for this second to last prompt, I want you to recommend a book that has both heartbreaking stuff in it and heartwarming stuff in it. And for that one, I'm going to be recommending a book that I already slightly mentioned, and that is A Little Life by Hanya Yanihara. So A Little Life is infamous on BookTube. It's one of those tearjerker books, and it definitely is that, but it also is a very heartwarming book. It is mainly about one character called Jude, but we are actually following a group of friends of 4, but Jude is the friend that we are focusing on most, and he has had a very traumatic past. And in that respect, it's also very important to mention that this one has a huge lot of trigger warnings. Basically, more or less every trigger warning you can think of will probably apply to this book. But so Jude has had a traumatic past, and throughout this book we are diving more into his traumatic past. Sadly, also things in his current timeline are happening that reaffirm that trauma, and he is very much dealing with self-loathing as a reaction to what he has gone through in his past. It is very much a book about found family, because not only is this friend group his found family, but he also gets adopted at some point by a person, by one of his professors, I think, and he very much has these bright spots in his life still, including a beautiful relationship that unfolds. So this has also got a male-male relationship to it. So I definitely highly recommend it. It's kind of double. Some people really think that it's going too far in its portrayal of trauma, that it's just torture porn, more or less. For me, I definitely didn't feel like that. I definitely felt like there was also enough of bright spots and of beautiful moments in order for me to feel like this book was really trying to do more than just torture us to no end. And then the final prompt for this one will be an overall prompt, because the myth is now over, but the goal of the myth was to explain how evil has basically gotten into our world. Why is this world filled with evil things in it? And so for this final prompt, I want you to recommend a book that is all about the fight against evil. And so for this one, I am choosing The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is a nostalgia read for me, though I actually have nostalgia for the animated version of this story, because that animated that animated movie I saw so many times. I cannot begin to tell you how much nostalgia I have about the Red Bull and things like that. But so I read this book a few years ago, and I definitely think that it holds up as well. In this book we are following a unicorn. She is very much alone. She has never really seen any other unicorns, nor is she necessarily craving all that much to find one, but then one day she overhears humans saying that there are no more unicorns in the world. And so she sets out to find the other unicorns. She sets out to find other unicorns and to figure out whether the stories she's been hearing about the Red Bull are true or not. Along the way she will meet other people, such as a sort of failed magician's apprentice who will help her along the quest. But so yeah, this is my tag video. I hope you enjoyed it. Definitely let me know if you want like more of these sort of story inspired book tags, because I actually really enjoyed making this one and kind of filming it and letting you guys like having this be sort of like story time moments. But so I would like to tag a few people for this one, and so I'm going to be tagging Sarah from Voyage Through Worlds. I'm going to be tagging The Reading Witch. I'm going to be tagging Mariana Quesada, and lastly I'm going to be tagging Break Even Books, because I know that he likes to do a lot of tag videos, so I hope he will also take this one. But so yeah, let me know if you've taken this tag. I might make a whole playlist of people who have taken the tag at some point. And let me know if you like the books that I mentioned, whether you've read them, whether you want to read them now, and then we can talk about them. See you guys for the next one.